Shireen Malherbe, Palestinian novelist and children's author, is one of those who've got family members amongst the hostages seized in the West Bank. And we wanted to talk to her about those. Shireen, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. It must add insult to injury that nobody even talks about the Holocaust on the West Bank. Everyone, at least on social media, is fixated on Gaza, where the events are truly unprecedented. But much more quietly, Israel is basically committing the same kind of crimes on the West Bank, where Hamas doesn't exist, where their own, I was going to call him a puppet, let me be kinder, their own allied president is supposedly in control, Mahmoud Abbas, yet Israel is running rampage in the territory. Tell us what you hear from your family.
Okay, hi George, thanks for having me back. The reason that I wanted to come on as well and talk to you is because the situation has just become unbearable. That's their words that are coming out now from my family in the West Bank. So just to be clear, we're talking about areas outside of Gaza, and also I do have family in East Jerusalem as well. And they have literally said, we are dying without people watching. And the situation has just, as you said, it's a rampage. And if you visit, some of my family did visit over the summer, you'll see how different the place is. One of my uncle's houses, there are no young men left in the house. He has three sons, and one by one, they have been kidnapped by the occupation in raids. And this is in Jericho in the West Bank. One of them was shot in the leg. They don't know where they are. They have literally disappeared. They are not receiving medical treatment. No one knows where they are. And this has, they have ramped this up massively since October the 7th, but definitely over the last few months. I think the total that one of my journalist members of the family told me was we're over 10,000 detained, as you said earlier. And he said the last count that they had, it was nearly 300 children who are also under 16 years old. So, I've been trying to sort of raise awareness, saying what can we do collectively to tell people about this. I contacted Cage, and they said, just try and tell as many people as possible and highlight the plight of the Palestinian prisoners. We've had, as you said, prisoners coming out. They are literally unrecognizable from the state that they've been treated in. They are seeing people and saying, I did not even know it was that person because they look so different. And I did try and want to get sort of names and speak to people, but they have been told not to speak to the media or anybody about anything that happens. As you said earlier as well, they're rearrested and they're put back in these jails where no one knows where they are, what's happening to them. And then when we do hear reports coming out, it's utter savagery. So you have the prisoner situation, and then you also have the blockades throughout the West Bank. So just for the listeners who aren't aware, the villages in Palestine are separated from one another. They're separated through blockades that the occupation put up, whether these be metal security gates, armed, or whether they're just huge concrete roadblocks. You cannot get out of your village if they decide to close it off. And that's what they're doing now. They're closing off all the West Bank villages from one another, barricading them off from one another, completely freezing water and electricity, stopping people from traveling, getting in or out. And they're actually doing one of the biggest land grabs that we've ever seen whilst they're doing this. So they are building settlements between these villages to further break up the West Bank. And this is everywhere. This is including Jerusalem. This is Jericho. This is the north, as far north as Jenin. And even in Jenin, they've destroyed about 75%, I read just before I came online, of their roads. They're just bulldozing them up so people can't get out.
Yes, so they are raping prisoners, anally raping prisoners with objects. They've been caught red-handed on camera doing that, and were not prosecuted, were arrested and then freed, and it is now officially permissible for guards to anally rape Palestinian prisoners, even unto the point of death. In fact, one of the rapists is now a regular on the Sofa TV chat shows on the mainstream Israeli media. He had a balaclava on the first time, but he took it off when he realized that he was something of a personality. So they are seizing more and more land illegally. They are starving the population, dividing them from each other, digging up roads, dive bombing refugee camps. Balata was dive bombed by F-16s just yesterday. The number of people being killed and wounded is exponentially rising. And again, I make the point, adding insult to injury, nobody even talks about it. It must be particularly hard for someone like you with family there.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the imbalance. Like you said at first, the Israeli occupier covered his face, and then he just doesn't need to, because what's happening is they are acting with the full backing of of the West. There is no consequence whatsoever. There has not been a consequence for their actions, so they're emboldened. They're doing as much as they possibly can before, just as much as they possibly can. Nothing seems to be enough. Nothing is depraved enough. And don't forget this: how they treat Palestinian prisoners, how they treat Palestinians. This is policy. This is not, oh, it was a one-off. Whatever they want to say to try and rescue some PR, which, to be honest, is completely shot now. This is policy, always has been. There has never been there's been sort of a cover-up to make them appear, as you said, the most moral army in the world, to be this democracy, but it's now being exposed for what it is, and that is a brutal, genocidal regime. And that will continue unless someone puts a stop to it, because they're not going to stop it themselves.
Well, I'm so old, I remember the International Court of Justice ordering them to cease and desist. Oh, it must have been 6 months ago, finding them guilty of a myriad of war crimes, crimes against humanity. I'm so old, I remember the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court announcing that he was applying for arrest warrants on Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the defense minister. I'm so old I remember these things, but not many people will, because absolutely nothing happened as a result.
And nothing happens because you have a media which does not report. We have platforms like yours. There is platforms on social media. Even my book launch was censored. I mean, that's what we're talking about now. It's very hard to speak. We saw Richard Medhurst being arrested for his independent journalism. There's a huge crackdown on it. So it becomes very frustrating. And I think that's why the family member I was speaking to said, we are dying without anyone watching. He's actually been a journalist throughout Palestine his whole life. And he's, before I was even born. And I said, how are you covering it now? And he said, we just can't, because you are literally a target. I mean, children are targets. And I don't understand how half the world can look away and continue. So, we do have action that people are doing, but it just doesn't feel like it's enough. And, everyone's condemning, but there's no action. And it seems as though, normal life is continuing. for everybody else. And it just makes you feel as though, should it be continuing in this normal way while something so horrendous is happening, literally while everybody is watching, at least for the part in Gaza. And I think this is what is making it so unbearable for the Palestinians living there, is to know that everybody knows about this, and yet there's absolute silence from anybody that could actually do anything about it.
Well, let's go through who they are. And this is an important lesson that people have to learn. The British government, which is up to its neck in Palestinian blood, is a Labour government. The French government, up to its neck in Palestinian blood, is a Labour Blairite government in the form of Macron. The German government is literally up to its neck in blood, led by Labour, the SPD, and the Green Party. The United States, over its neck, up to its eyeballs in Palestinian blood, is the Democratic Party, the Labour equivalent in the United States. These are all centre-left governments, all of them committing these crimes against your people. It's pretty hard to bear, isn't it?
I mean, it's literally, for the people there, it's unbearable. For us watching in the diaspora and around the world, and, the allies of Palestine. And it's reached a stage where I write for a living, and there's almost barely no words left. So, what we've reached is this stage where we have it being filmed. We know the figures coming out. We know all of this is happening. We keep being told 40,000, 50,000 people murdered, 10,000 in prison. And they're saying, the problem with the numbers is that it's sort of adding to that dehumanization of Palestinians. So it's just making it another number, 10,000, 20,000. It's not making a difference. So I'm saying to my family, what would you say to everybody on the platform I'm going on today with you? And he said, tell them to put themselves in our shoes and imagine that they are at home at night, even if they have a home left, because they're all being literally stolen from under their feet, with your children asleep in bed, and there is a raid at your door, and you have a full army coming to drag your children out of bed to take them to these god-awful places in the middle of the desert where you don't know what's happened to them. He said, as much as we need the figures, and we absolutely need the figures, what we also need is to imagine that we are in that situation. There shouldn't be any difference that it's them and not us. This is where we are now, where there's a separation almost. Oh, it's happening in the Middle East and it's to Palestinians, so it's not really anything to do with me. But it is. This is a huge human rights violation. This is a huge violation of what humanity is supposed to be. And the world is not going to forget this. So, I would say what's coming out is this: really try and understand what they are going through, so that it, takes us out of this position, so that we act and do something about it.
Well, empathy is in short supply amongst the powerful and their scribes in the national and international media. But Shireen Malherbe, you are on the right side, and may God bless your pen. Thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows.